She was afraid to go. And I remember her squeezing my hand and the feel of that paper-thin skin and the fragile bones, but the grip that she had on my hand where she said that it wasn't that she didn't want to vote, she was afraid of it. She was afraid of the billy clubs and the hoses and the dogs, and she did not believe that this time would be any different. She didn't believe that the power of democracy was finally hers. And my grandfather told her that she had to get up, that her children had been in trouble trying to guarantee this right, and that she owed it to them, if not to herself, to get up and vote. And she said she was still terrified, she was still deeply afraid of this moment, but she was also ashamed of herself. She was ashamed that she didn't want to reach for this power. She got up, she finished getting dressed, and they went to vote. And as she squeezed my hand, she said, "But Stacey, I've never missed another election."
Mississippi and the other southern states are engaged in a life and death fight with the federal government. What is this fight all about? The Voting Rights Act of 1965. Insofar as the Negro is concerned, it will suspend all literacy requirements of the Mississippi law.
Georgia has no problem with reference to voter registration. We do not need federal registrars in this state.
I am unalterably opposed and will fight to the end any attempts to reshape or mold our state to conform to the prescription written by dictatorial left-wing integrationist social planners daydreaming on the bank of the Potomac.
The southern states challenged the Voting Rights Act immediately in the courts as unconstitutional, but they failed. The Supreme Court upholds the law 8-1.
If you frame the argument, who doesn't believe that people should be allowed to vote? While there will be some people that will raise their hand, most Americans believe that citizens should be allowed to vote.
The bill that I will sign today extends the temporary provisions of the Act for 7 more years and broadens the provisions to bar discrimination against Spanish-speaking Americans, American Indians, Alaskan Natives, and Asian Americans.
The Voting Rights Act began with the former Confederate states, but this was a law that understood that discrimination could crop up anywhere. The state of Arizona was such a bad actor that in 1975, the U.S. Justice Department added Arizona to the process because of their long history of discrimination against Latinos and Native Americans.
Hispanics were facing some of the same kind of things in Arizona, in Texas, across the Southwest that African Americans face in the segregated South. Things like literacy tests, voter intimidation. They said, we need protection under the Voting Rights Act as well. Maricopa County is the largest and most important county in Arizona. From 1960 to 1964, William Rehnquist was in charge of ballot security operations for the Republican Party of Maricopa County. This was called Operation Eagle Eye. And what Rehnquist and others did was they went to Democratic parts of Phoenix and they asked Latino and African American voters if they could read the Constitution. So this was a de facto literacy test. And if people could not read it to the satisfaction of Rehnquist and others, Rehnquist challenged their eligibility to vote. William Rehnquist, the future Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, was on the front lines of voter suppression in Maricopa County, Arizona, all the way back in the 1960s.
America's most unwelcoming prison regime likes to advertise it always has vacancies.
It shows I will always have room for illegals.
The man who calls himself America's toughest sheriff makes his prison as unpleasant as possible.
Arpaio became the face of terror for our community. We would see posses go into neighborhoods to do roundups. There were checkpoints to ask people for their papers. It created a righteous anger, saying that we deserve more and we do not deserve to live under this.
We gotta tell the whole world this is his territory! I said my people! Yeah! We got a story! Yeah! We gotta tell the whole world this is his territory! Alright, how's everybody doing? Good. How's everybody doing, y'all? Yeah. Alright, dope. About almost 3 years ago, it was my first day at Lucha. And Stephanie was up here at the front, and she was talking about how we're gonna register a lot of people to vote. And I remember her giving me the clipboard, right? And she was like, all right, we're gonna go to Walmart. And I was so scared.
I'm still hoping for the doors wide open. Our volunteers are standing on the shoulders of folks that have paved the way for us to be able to cast that ballot and become part of a power community that is now impacting policies.
Hi. Are you a registered voter? No, how come? Are you a citizen? Hola. ¿No está registrado usted para votar? No, ¿por qué no? No. Ah, pues muchas gracias.
There is always a debate on why aren't our communities participating?
I'm already registered. Oh, you are? What about y'all? No, how come?
I don't know. I don't trust politics.
No, you're right.
So it's like I'm not doing my thing.
No, heck yeah. I feel like, I mean, that's what I always thought too, right?
The most important part of voter registration is that human connection and being able to understand why that person does not trust.
Intimidation from the government is real, it is powerful. And it is because of the changing demographics in the nation. It is the fear of what this larger vote can mean.
If there is anyone out there who still doubts that America is a place where all things are possible, who still wonders if the dream of our founders is alive in our time, who still questions the power of our democracy, tonight is your answer.
Opponents of the Voting Rights Act seized on Barack Obama's election as a reason why the Voting Rights Act was no longer necessary. At the very moment that you see the ultimate progress, you see conservatives embracing that progress as a reason to try to get rid of the law that made Obama's election possible.
Barack Obama scared the bejeebers out of him. He brought 15 million new voters to the polls. This is what we should be celebrating. Bringing 15 million new people into this incredible civic society, engaged in this democracy, believing that they have a stake in this democracy, and getting out to vote. Instead, that Obama coalition becomes the hit list for voter suppression. How do we stop African Americans, Hispanics, Asian Americans, the young, and the poor from voting? The Supreme Court decision Shelby County v. Holder allowed that to happen.
Shelby County, Alabama, there was an election there in which the districts were redrawn so that the only African-American city council member lost his race. Voter suppression and gerrymandering are two sides of the same coin. Efforts by politicians in power to try to manipulate the process to benefit themselves at the expense of others.
Gerrymandering is a real problem. It's the practice of drawing voting districts in a way that creates unfair advantages for whoever happens to be drawing the lines.
In the age of computers, you can gerrymander with scientific precision. You can run in and out of alleys and up and down streets and carefully include and exclude whichever voters you want in one district and not in another.
Shouldn't all of this be illegal? Well, that's complicated, because if you're gerrymandering to disadvantage minorities, yes, that is illegal under the Voting Rights Act. But if you're gerrymandering to disadvantage voters of an opposing party, that has generally been allowed.
Shelby County willfully violated federal law. They didn't bother to go up to the Department of Justice to check on whether it was okay as they were changing the voting boundaries as the Voting Rights Act required. When they got called on it, when they got sued, they said, we didn't do anything wrong. The era of racism is over.
What had been bipartisan before became extremely partisan after the election of Barack Obama. You know, people tend to forget that Republicans supported it. Every reauthorization of the Voting Rights Act was signed by a Republican president.
I think that democracy, if it's to work, then everybody that's eligible to be a voter should be registered and they should vote.
I am proud to sign the Voting Rights Act, Reauthorization and Amendments Act of 2006.
Ronald Reagan called it the crown jewel of American democracy. But with every subsequent reauthorization, there's a legal challenge brought.
It's a seemingly coordinated strategy that we have seen waged by opponents to rip out the heart of the Voting Rights Act. It was almost a strategy of let's throw spaghetti against the wall and see which one sticks. The Shelby County case is the one that survived the lower courts and winded its way up to the Supreme Court.
The Supreme Court hears a challenge to the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Its detractors say the Voting Rights Act is out of date. Its defenders consider it a needed bulwark for justice.
The Voting Rights Act requires 9 states to get federal approval of changes to their election laws.
From a lawyer's point of view, this is a valid legal case. It could be honorably argued, and that's the business we're in. So we took the case.
We'll hear argument first this morning in case Shelby County versus Holder. Mr. Ryan?
Mr. Chief Justice, and may it please the court.
We argued that the Voting Rights Act was probably one of the deepest intrusions of the federal government into areas that states traditionally administered.
I think that really doesn't mask the need for equal treatment of the sovereign states.
I'm going to have a hard time with that. We can't treat states the same because their problems are different, their populations are different, their needs are different, everything's different.
The non-covered states are worse in that regard than the non-covered states. Is that correct?
Justice Scalia,
every one of them is worse.
Justice Scalia, it's a fair question.
Not just a fair one, it's the crucial question.
The South has changed and made progress, but some things remain stubbornly the same, and the trained effort to deny African American voters the franchise is part of Alabama's history to this very day.
Have there been episodes, egregious episodes of the kind you're talking about in states that are not covered?
Absolutely, Chief Justice Roberts.
Well, then it doesn't seem to help you make the point that the differential treatment continues to be justified.
John Roberts had it out for the Voting Rights Act as far back as 1982. Early in his political career, it was John Roberts' job to try to prevent the Congress from reauthorizing the Voting Rights Act.
John Roberts, his mentor was William Rehnquist. This is why this lineage is so important, because he hated the Voting Rights Act.
I knew that this was an important act. I knew that it was doing important work, and I knew that it would be a disaster for the court to strike it down.
A controversial ruling today by the Supreme Court.
5-4, the U.S. Supreme Court took the teeth out of a law enacted nearly 50 years ago.
It invalidated a key part of the Voting Rights Act.
Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, joined by the 3 other liberal justices, said throwing out preclearance when it has worked and is continuing to work to stop discriminatory changes is like throwing away your umbrella in a rainstorm because you are not getting wet.
I am deeply disappointed with the court's decision in this matter. This decision represents a serious setback for voting rights and has the potential to negatively affect millions of Americans across the country. I don't know if it's appropriate to say I was pissed off by what the court did. Thank you. It really struck home that this was a political decision that the court was making. Justice Ginsburg was correct. If you have an umbrella that keeps you dry in the middle of a thunderstorm, the fact that you're dry doesn't mean that you don't need the umbrella.
Every single one of those states that was covered previously by the Voting Rights Act was told, never mind, we think you're good now, go forth.
The floodgates literally opened in 2013 when the Supreme Court issued its ruling.
The ink on Tuesday's ruling wasn't even dry when Texas's Republican Attorney General declared that his state's controversial voter ID law will take effect, quote, immediately.
Just hours after the decision came down, states began to implement voter suppression laws all across the country.
Texas took the lead on this one. It spread like wildfire. So you're seeing them in Pennsylvania. You're seeing them in Kansas. You're seeing them in Wisconsin. You're seeing them in Ohio.
9 more states are enforcing new laws requiring eligible voters to present a government-issued photo ID at the polls.
Overwhelming majority of Americans, regardless of their political views and regardless of their race or ethnicity, support voter ID laws.
This is not Jim Crow. This is not a police dog. This is not a fire hose.
When you restrict access to the right to vote by creating a narrow set of IDs that can be used, it's creating blocks to people being able to participate. They tried to make it seem rational and facially neutral, racially neutral, but it's not.
We had voters who were born in the Jim Crow South who had no birth certificates because white hospitals would not allow them to give birth in their facilities.
I had my Social Security card, my to-go pass, I had my United Healthcare, I had my red, white, and blue card, and I had my Ford card. And there still wasn't enough to vote.
About 21 million Americans don't have strict forms of government-issued ID. That works out to about 10% of the electorate.
You look at Texas. If you have a state-issued photo ID that says you're allowed to carry a concealed weapon, that's sufficient to allow you to vote. If, however, you have a state-issued photo ID that says you're a student at the University of Texas, that's insufficient.
Young people in America, they could have the most power of any electoral bloc in the country. If you take out 1 or 2 campuses, you can swing an election. And so that's exactly what New Hampshire Republicans decided to do.
Studies will show that if you can get young adults to vote between the ages of 18 and 24, they're more likely to vote going further into their adulthood. Once you strip someone their access of being able to vote, it takes away their role within our democracy.
Voter suppression has often targeted communities that are seen as non-normative. We saw this come into sharp relief in North Dakota, where a law that required a residential address on driver's licenses seemed benign. But the reality was that for those communities, getting a residential address on a reservation required that the state or local government grant that to you, and it didn't happen.
A majority of Indian country does not have physical addresses. They use post office boxes. It became very evident that the law was created to suppress the Native American vote.
The only way to get recognition is to vote. And that's what it is, a matter of survival.
In Wisconsin, they put a new voter ID law in effect in the run-up to the 2016 election.
A lot of Republicans since 1984 in the presidential races have not been able to win in Wisconsin. Why would it be any different for a Ted Cruz or a Donald Trump?
Well, I think Hillary Clinton is about the weakest candidate the Democrats have ever put up. And now we have photo ID, and I think photo ID is going to make a little bit of a difference as well.
Up to 23,000 people were blocked or deterred from voting. And Donald Trump only won the state of Wisconsin by just over 22,000 votes. So this one restriction in Wisconsin alone had a huge impact on Donald Trump becoming the next president of the United States.
Ohio has become, sadly, the leader in creating certain types of voter suppression that other states have followed. And there's no bigger example of that than purging. There is certainly need to update your voting rolls. People pass away, people move. There also are some states that are really smart about this, things like automatic voter registration. But Ohio does the exact opposite. Ohio's had a purging process where if you don't vote in several elections and you don't respond to a postcard, you're knocked off the rolls.
When it comes to the right to vote, Ohio is a use it or lose it state.
In a split 5-4 decision, the Supreme Court ruled that in Ohio, you can be dropped from the voter rolls if you do not vote for about 6 years and do not respond to a card the state sends you in the mail.
They send you a postcard to your house. It really does look like a piece of junk mail. If you don't send it back, they assume you're not there. Then they purge you from the roll. They say, oh, this person didn't send it back. We're going to drop them.
They're not notified that they have been purged, and that's a problem.
In a state of less than 12 million, 2 million have been purged. A lot of people are on that list because they move every year. They're poor. They're going from one place to the next to the next. But also, it turns out there are thousands and thousands of people on this list who had voted recently, who were not supposed to be on the purge list. 20% of those people were on in error, government error.
And in the United States, the right to vote is the only right you can lose for not using it. You can decide not to go hunting on a Saturday and you don't lose your Second Amendment rights, but in 9 states, it is the law of the land that you can lose your right to vote simply for not using it. After the Shelby decision, we saw over 1,600 precincts close in the states that were once covered by the Voting Rights Act. And when you shut down a polling place where someone can go a mile to vote and suddenly they have to go 10 miles and they don't have a car, they will not vote. Under Brian Kemp, 214 polling places shut down in the state of Georgia. He used the gutting of the Voting Rights Act almost immediately.
Jim Crow 2.0, that's what we're saying. When you look at Georgia in 2018, it is the rise of Jim Crow again.
The Shelby decision, what it did was give carte blanche to states like Georgia to restore every racist trope they had. Had I run for governor in 2012, it would have empirically been an easier election. By the time I was running for governor, I had had 8 years of watching the Secretary of State, Brian Kemp, build a national reputation for voter suppression. We anticipated that voter suppression was part of Brian Kemp's behavior. What we couldn't anticipate was that I was going to be in a fight with the very person who controlled the system.
I got a big truck, just in case I need to round up criminal illegals and take them home myself. Yep, I just said that.
Yeah, he just said that, and he's joining us now, the candidate who calls himself a politically incorrect conservative, current Georgia Secretary of State, Brian Kemp. Good morning, sir.
Morning, guys. Great to be on with you.
Brian Kemp had the ability to not only be the candidate in the race, but he was also running the election. He was the constitutionally authorized election supervisor.
That would have been illegal in virtually every other advanced democracy in the entire world.
We sued Brian Kemp multiple times over his efforts to lock people out of the ballot box. One of his most nefarious schemes was called Exact Match.
More than 53,000 Georgia residents have had their registrations put on hold thanks to a policy that requires their applications to precisely match information from other state agencies. Georgia's population is approximately 32% black, but the list of voter registrations on hold is nearly 70% black.
Well. My old friend racism. I've been expecting you.
The ACLU filed a lawsuit because absentee ballots were being rejected because the signature on the absentee ballot purportedly did not match the signature that was on file.
The problem is signatures change. It's one of the worst metrics to use.
A lot of people for whom English was not their first language will have an inconsistent signature because they have to write and sign their American name. Asian voters, when they immigrated here, they adopted an American name. My grandmother had an American signature, and she has not been able to sign that name consistently.
The argument for many of these voter suppression laws is this very fallacious argument that it's necessary to stop voter fraud.
The voter fraud is real. It must be stopped. We need every tool to go after it.
Voter ID laws stop voter fraud.
I've dedicated my career to fighting voter fraud by doing things like having photo ID.
Every time voter fraud occurs, it cancels out the vote of a lawful citizen and undermines democracy. Can't let that happen.
When Donald Trump lost the popular vote, he lost it by 2.9 million votes, and he said 3 million people voted illegally. And there was no evidence to back this up, but this was a dramatic assertion of voter fraud on a really unprecedented scale. Trump employed this rhetoric to create his own quote-unquote commission on election integrity. There was really an all-star cast of some of the biggest vote suppressors in the Republican Party today. People like Hans von Spakovsky of the Heritage Foundation that had built the case for voter ID laws and similar restrictions on voting.
The President's Advisory Commission wanted to get the voter registration list from all the states so they could start doing comparisons and find people who were still on the list who were deceased, to find individuals who were voting in more than one state.
Yesterday, the vice chair of that commission sent a letter to all 50 states asking for voter data that includes addresses, party ID, voter history, and social security information.
This was like a big brother data request. There was no evidence that the administration would ensure the privacy and security of this data. And moreover, why did they need to know party affiliation?
Many states resisted that. They refused to provide that data.
Opposition to this is bipartisan to some degree. Mississippi's Secretary of State, a Republican, has called it a violation of voters' privacy and said that the commission can, quote, go jump in the Gulf of Mexico.
The Commission on Election Integrity that Donald Trump formed was a complete and utter disaster. It disbanded without issuing any findings, and it found no evidence of voter fraud during its entire investigative process.
We have a database at the Heritage Foundation that we're constantly adding to. It has a sampling of proven voter fraud cases from across the country. It's got almost 1,300 cases in it.
Here's what they truly found, and let's put it up again for people. 146 million total registered voters. Out of those, there were 2,068 alleged voter fraud cases, okay? So it does happen, but it doesn't happen on a national scale.
Doesn't affect the outcome.
It would affect the outcome.
So then you ask yourself, why do we have this architecture of all of these obstacles? Voter ID, gerrymandering, purging, poll closures. Why do we have all of this if voter fraud is virtually non-existent? When you ask that question that way, then it leads you down a path where America must look at itself again, the way that it looked at itself when it saw the cataclysm on the Edmund Pettus Bridge.
Running for governor was about changing what it meant to be a leader in Georgia. And there is nothing more transformative in the Deep South than a Black woman from poverty having opportunity. It hadn't been done before, so I thought I would take advantage of the freedom to try the things no one else tried. We know that voter turnout is the best remedy to voter suppression. We decided to go after everyone who could vote.
Y'all already been out to vote? We need everybody out there in droves.
I'm gonna make sure they vote. Matter of fact, they ain't gonna work tomorrow, they don't vote.
Ooh, give me some. That's what you gotta do. You gotta put it out there like that.
I've been out here talking to people who are, yeah, I've never voted before. Oh, I've never had someone come to my door before.
Too often, politicians only go to the people they know, and they only engage the people they can rely on.
Go out there, man. We're trying to make history. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I'm a vote.
That's what I want to hear.
Which means you don't adapt to the changing needs of community.
Among democratic countries, the United States stands out for having very low voter turnout. Politicians produced the system because elections are easier to manage if the electorate is smaller.
Ask everybody, you know Stacey Abrams? You know Stacey Abrams? You know Stacey Abrams? Finally somebody said, I know Stacey Abrams. And they said, I have her cell number. I go, give it to me. I'm gonna call her up right now. So I called Stacey Abrams. And I said, Stacey, this is Oprah. You know what she said? She said, girl, let me pull over to the side of the road. Ladies and gentlemen, Stacey Abrams.
My name is Stacey Abrams, and I'm running to be the next governor of the great state of Georgia.
We talked to people. We met them at their doors. We met them at their churches, their mosques, their temples, their shrines, their synagogues. I went to Dragon Con and one music fest. I also talked about real issues. I talked about my brother and his fight with drug addiction and incarceration.
There are thousands of Walters throughout the state of Georgia who only get the help they need when they go to prison. I'm running for governor because I don't believe Georgia is just a state of retribution. I want us to be a state of redemption.
Let's get it done! Let's get it done!
But I also had solutions, and I talked about the things that people care about every single day.
Georgia, we need you to show up. Stacey Abrams
para la candidata Stacey Abrams para gobernadora.
We wanted everybody who could vote and to vote for me.
It is in our hands
to make Stacey Abrams the next governor of the state of Georgia.
And give it up for your next governor, Stacey Abrams.
Thank you, Georgia.
One of our missions in our campaign was to focus attention on early voting. And so by way of example, I went to vote early. And I came to my precinct armed with my ID, ready to cast my ballot. I also had a bunch of television cameras with me because we wanted to publicize how important this was. I hand my information over, and the young woman with great trepidation tells me that I cannot vote because I've applied for an absentee ballot. And I lean in quietly and I say, no, I didn't. I've voted in the state of Georgia since 1992. I've never applied for an absentee ballot. She desperately wants to be helpful, but something had happened and she did not have good information. Her manager came over, we talked, and we were able to figure out what needed to be done. What worries me are the thousands of people in Georgia who tried to vote that didn't have CNN and MSNBC standing over their shoulders, who were told no and who believed that no was the answer because they didn't have the authority or the knowledge to demand better.
We really knew by the last week of early vote that we were seeing extraordinary turnout beyond our projections. And we also knew that we were seeing an extraordinary inability of the election system to process the folks. It was the very big warning bell that Election Day was going to be a problem.
We were with Brian Kemp and his family as they showed up to vote.
He said this is an invalid card.
Okay, you go back in there and read through it.
And Kemp had some voting issues. His voter card said invalid.
You just went and cast your ballot there. During your tenure as Secretary of State here, you've made it harder for tens of thousands of people
Well, I would
in Georgia
disagree with that
to cast their ballots
completely.
across the
because
state.
you have no factual basis on making it harder for people to vote. It has never been easier for people to vote in the state of Georgia than it is right now.
One of the races that we've been watching really closely is the governor's race in the state of Georgia.
From Midtown to Marietta, we're seeing long lines at polling places across the area.
This morning we got here when the polls opened at 7. We were told that the machines weren't working. Finally at 11 they got machines that were working. So we've been in line for 5 hours.
How long have you waited in line here this morning?
About 3.5 hours.
Are you gonna go home?
I'm hurting. I'll be back. I got to go take some medicine.
These lines are insane. We had a big fucking problem. People are leaving lines all over. I'm getting these reports.
My parents are U.S. citizens. They voted in the past, but today when they showed up to vote, they were told that they were purged from the voter rolls.
We'd received thousands of calls to our voter protection hotline, conversations about people being turned away from the polls.
This is where you would normally go? The name didn't come up, and yours didn't come up. Even when I searched.
Those stories were coming to me at every moment.
Some were here for 3 hours, others here for much longer, after the express poll machine stopped working inside the Annistown Elementary polling place Tuesday morning.
We knew who we were up against. We'd been fighting this guy for years. And then to see what the result was of intentional underfunding of elections, intentional non-training of local elections officials.
He says he went to cast his ballot Tuesday morning. He handed the poll worker his ID, and then she...
Mr. Whitten, wait, stop. You've already voted. I said, no, I think I would have remembered that. She says, no, I see here that you voted, and it looks like several days ago.
Intentional purges, intentional precinct consolidation.
They combined 2 locations, gave us 3 machines. Last election, I had 12. I don't know why.
Intentional lack of training around absentee and provisional ballots. All the compendium coming together.
Students were showing up and their names were not on the actual roll. And so they were casting provisional ballots, so much so that they actually ran out of provisional ballots.
It was just out of control.
We knew people were trying to be heard, but I also knew they weren't being listened to. election night, I knew something had gone horribly wrong.
Take a look at where the numbers stand right now. As you can see, the numbers are now tightening. The spread is only some 60,000.
Several counties have yet to process their provisional and emergency ballots, leaving an estimated 22,000 ballots outstanding.
By 1 a.m., what we knew was that the race was too close to call.
I'm here tonight to tell you votes remain to be counted. There are voices that were waiting to be heard. Across our state, folks are opening up the dreams of voters in absentee ballots, and we believe our chance for a stronger Georgia is just within reach. But we cannot seize it until all voices are heard. And I promise you tonight, we're going to make sure that every vote is counted. Every single vote.
We've heard from 40,000 Georgians and counting who told us story after story about the concerns and problems they have with our system across Georgia.
Our staff was, running around the state and collecting all of these stories, and we're in the federal courts fighting for each of these votes.
Every day there were votes that were found, and there were lawsuits that were settled that then added to the total.
And it was just a devastating, obvious thing, what happened. You couldn't swing a bat and not hit 14 people who had problems voting.
Governor Nathan Deal rolled out the gubernatorial red carpet Thursday for Brian Kemp, declaring him governor-elect, though the state has yet officially to certify the election.
Even if she got 100% of those votes, we still win with a 50% plus one vote majority. Actually, it's much more than that. So we're moving forward with the transition.
Brian Kemp is 25,622 votes above the threshold for a runoff election. 25,000 votes of nearly 4 million cast are at issue in this race. By his own admission, there are at least 25,000 outstanding votes and hundreds, if not thousands, of more that we are learning about and discovering every day. Georgians deserve to have their votes counted.
And some Abrams supporters protested peacefully outside the governor's office during Kemp's news conference, believing there are enough uncounted votes to force a runoff.
The judge is on tape. The lawyers on tape.
The rotunda of the Capitol.
I was taken out in handcuffs and jailed because I stood with my constituents to voice their concerns and make sure that every vote is counted.
By the end, we were still 17,000 votes shy of the runoff.
The ballot battle in Georgia's governor's race is over.
Brian Kemp will be certified the winner.
I was very angry. I'm still very angry. Very angry.
Make no mistake, the former Secretary of State was deliberate and intentional in his actions. Pundits and hyper-partisans will hear my words as a rejection of the normal order. You see, I'm supposed to say nice things and accept my fate. They will complain that I should not use this moment to recap what was done wrong or to demand a remedy. You see, as a leader, I should be stoic in my outrage and silent in my rebuke. But stoicism is a luxury, and silence is a weapon for those who would quiet the voices of the people. And I will not concede because the erosion of our democracy is not right.
Last night, as you all know, my opponent ended her campaign. The election is over, and I'm honored to be Georgia's governor-elect.
My responsibility as the daughter of Robert and Carolyn Abrams, as the granddaughter of people who had been denied the right to vote, as the great-granddaughter of slaves, my job was to use this election to talk about the system that let this be. And so we decided on that night that we were going to demand that the system itself be fixed. Because when you concede, what you're saying is that the system worked the way it was supposed to. And I refuse to believe that a system that is supposed to protect our democracy worked the way it was supposed to. In 2020 and beyond, the way we fight voter suppression is by meeting it where it is. That means, first and foremost, volunteer to help people get registered to vote.
Hi, Nina Durham. My name is Stacey Abrams. I wanted to thank you for all the work you're doing to reach out to voters and making sure they stay on the rolls.
If you believe in one person, one vote, if you believe in representative government, then you will fight for this democracy.
So if you fill it out right now, we can mail it off for you.
Our power is in our vote. Our power is in our voice. And if we willingly choose to remain silent, we give up that power.
Today that we celebrate what it means to be in America. Today our returning citizens have their right to vote restored.
Plan out what you're going to do to make sure your ballot is cast and counted. And then ask your friends and family whether they have a plan.
Even if you've done everything right, do not assume you're registered.
Check to make sure that you haven't been purged or that your polling place has moved.
Vote as early as possible. Take your friends with you to the polls.
Talk to your neighbors about voting.
Call your parents and ask them if they voted. Call your grandparents.
To make sure that people know what precinct they're in, where their polling location is.
And then you turn up at the polls. And you don't leave until you cast your ballot.
They told voters to anticipate long lines. Is 2.5 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, is that reasonable, though, in your mind, David?
It's worth the wait. It's worth the wait. Folks die for this right that I'm queen, so I would never take advantage of it, so I'm here for the long haul.
It's a life and death matter. It really is.
It's not going to be the courts that save us. It's not going to be the justices in their robes. It's got to be the people.
If you were to come out to vote, we could elect who we wanted to, we could get done what we wanted to, and we could make sure that our voice was heard.
The fight for voting rights needs to be a defining civil rights issue today.
The desire to keep certain people away from the polls, it's a reality that we have to be prepared to confront. And unless we confront that reality and base actions on that reality, we won't make the progress that we all want to make in this country.
I believe in our democracy. I believe in our nation. And I think our strongest patriotism is a patriotism that says that every voice matters and that every vote counts and that we will do everything in our power to make it so.
Let's stop thinking that our voice don't matter and vote. Educate yourself and know who you're voting for. Because it's a lot of us. It's a lot of us. It's a lot of us! A lot of us!
The table about to turn. The table about to turn.
Register to vote. Even if you think you're already registered, check your registration status.
Seriously, check to see if you're registered to vote at allinthefilm.com. Don't be a victim of voter purge.
If you're registered, make sure the information is correct.
If not, update it. The table about to turn.
Oh, and make sure to keep your receipts. Take a screenshot so that no one can deny your registration.
Get informed. Find out what documents or ID are required for you to vote in your state so that you will have time to prepare to vote.
Make a plan. Look up your polling place and the time it's open and how you're getting there. And what you can do to stay safe if you're casting your socially distanced vote in person.
Some states allow any voter to vote absentee. Other states have stricter requirements. Head to allinthefilm.com to find out details about your state and how to request a ballot.
Go to 2020census.gov and complete your census form. Ensure that your community is counted and help combat gerrymandering.
And most importantly, know your rights.
If the polls close and you in a line, man, stay in a line because you got the right to vote.
If you make a mistake on your ballot, ask for a new one.
If the machines are down at your polling place, ask for a paper ballot. If they can't find your name on the voter rolls, then ask for a provisional ballot.
And if you run into any problems or have any questions on Election Day, call the Election Protection Hotline, 866-OUR-VOTE.
Think you got all that?
Are you all in?
Perfect. Now,
go and tell literally everyone
you know.
Literally everyone you know.
Yeah. I've been flipping through my timeline, trying to get my mind right. My city cried out, I got to cool down, but I'm under pressure. Cooking with my Crisco, look at where my fists go. A renegade when I'm in a rage. I got to cool down, but I'm under pressure. I keep my hands dirty, my mind clean. Got a new agenda with a new dream. I'm kicking out the old regime. Liberation, elevation, education. America, you a lie, but the whole world about to testify. I said the whole world about to testify. And the table's about to turn. Ain't gonna stop until it turn. No, it's time for it to turn. We can't wait for it to turn. Yeah, the table got to turn. It's a boomerang booming back. Yeah, you laid an egg, now it's about to hatch. Yeah, your gaslighting about to meet your match. You fuck up the kitchen, then you should do the dishes. Burning down plantations. Ain't no parking, I don't need no validation. I like sage when I'm in a rage. I don't need permission, I got my intuition. Hands dirty, mind clean. A different vision with a new dream. We kicking out the old regime. Liberation, elevation, education. I said America, you's a lie, but the whole world about to testify. I said the whole world about to testify. We gon' watch the table, now we gon' watch the table to turn. That's right.